previous fishing tips and tricks, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the disadvantages and advantages of using braided line, fluorocarbon line, and monofilament fishing line. Now first I'm going to talk about the advantages of using braided line. Now braided line is personally my favorite type of line to use. The advantage of braided line is it has a very long shelf life. Typically you can use braided line for about a whole fishing season. If you get the good brand, if you get really bad brands, it will only last about half a season. Another advantage of braided line is it has virtually no stretch. Basically, if it has no stretch, this will basically allow you to feel very light strikes. And if you're fishing a lure off the bottom like a fluke, basically you can feel just about everything that's bouncing off the bottom. Another advantage is it has a very thin diameter especially for heavier pound test. So if you put 20-pound braid on a spade caster, you could probably put double the amount of yards than on monofilament. Like with monofilament, you could normally put about 200 yards, but with 20-pound braid, you probably could put around 400 yards. And now I'm going to talk about the disadvantages of braided line. Now braided line doesn't have many disadvantages. The big one I would say is that it's very noticeable in clear water. So basically, in clear water, a lot of fish can see it and it'll basically spook them. One way you can get around this is basically by tying a fluorocarbon leader on the end. Now there is a certain way to tie a fluorocarbon leader to braided line. I'm going to post a video on that, basically teaching you guys how to tie one on in the future. Now the other disadvantage of braided line is it can be very expensive at times. It's not too expensive, but if you typically get the better brands, it can be pretty expensive, right around $20. But later in the video, I'll show you guys the best brands to get. Next, I'm going to talk about the advantages of monofilament line. Now there really aren't that many advantages of monofilament line. Monofilament line is personally the worst line that I've used. The first advantage of monofilament line is it is clear. It's not as clear as fluorocarbon, but it is pretty clear. Another advantage is it's very cheap. So if you have a really crappy rod and you really just don't want to put expensive line on it, you just put monofilament line so you don't have to waste your money on really good line on a crappy rod. Now I'm going to talk about the disadvantages of monofilament line. Now monofilament line does have a lot of disadvantages. One of the biggest is that it has memory. So basically memory, it'll basically coil. If you put too much on a spinning reel, it'll typically coil off your reel and it'll just put more backlashes on a bait caster. And it's really monofilament line isn't very good. Another disadvantage is that it does not last long. Typically monofilament line will only last like half a season. Especially if you leave it out in the sun, it'll get dry rotten and really weak. So monofilament line really isn't that good. Another disadvantage is that it has a lot of stretch. Basically this stretch will allow you not to feel any light strikes, and it just makes it pretty weak. Next I'm going to talk about the advantages of fluorocarbon line. Now fluorocarbon fishing line is very good line. One of the biggest advantages is that it's virtually invisible in clear water. This will basically allow you to have line that won't be able to be seen in especially clear water, and the fish won't see your line, so that's a really good thing. Another advantage is that it doesn't have as much stretch as monofilament line. Now it does have stretch, but it doesn't have nearly as much stretch as monofilament fishing line. Now there are a few disadvantages to fluorocarbon fishing line. One of the biggest disadvantages is that it can be very expensive at times. If you get the FCS Sniper brand, or maybe even the more expensive pro brands, you can spend about $32 for 200 yards. Now typically you really don't have to buy 200 yards, you can just get leaders, which is what I would recommend. You can get about 25 yards for about $13. So buying leaders would be the better way to go. Another disadvantage is it does last long, but sometimes it doesn't last nearly as long as braid. You just gotta watch out where your line is, make sure it's not out in the sun, or else it'll get very dry rotten. Now I'm going to talk to you guys about the types of brands of fishing line you should get. Now for braided line, I would recommend getting the Power Pro brand. This is basically what the spool looks like. Power Pro is very good. You can typically get about 100 yards for about $12 and 300 yards for $20. This stuff's really good. You can buy all the other cheaper brands like Spider Wire. I wouldn't recommend getting them because they don't last nearly as long. But Power Pro, in my opinion, is one of the best ones, braided fishing line brands to get. Now the next one I'm going to talk about is the monofilament brand that you should get. Now monofilament, it's really important to get good monofilament line if you're ever going to use it. I would recommend getting the Trilene brands. Those brands aren't very good. I would recommend getting the R-Line brand. And that's what it looks like. Now our line can be kind of expensive. It can be right around $20 for about 400 yards. But that's a lot of line. But really, our line is one of the best lines you can get. You can get these really big spools with like about 600 yards on. But if you were ever going to get monofilament, just get the R line brand. Now for fluorocarbon, typically I use liters. I usually don't use 200 yards. But for liters, I would recommend getting the Cigar blue label. Now this stuff can be right around $13 for 20 yards, well 25 yards. I usually get the 20-pound test. It can be expensive at times. You can get the other brands like FCS Sniper, but Cigar is a really good brand. But other than that, I would always recommend using liters instead of full 200 yards. If you want to, you can, but using liters is always a better way to go. Well, I hope this video is very informational, guys. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.